Good morning, I'm Dr. Matthew Cagle, curator here at Fort Ticonderoga, and in early 1774, the fate of this fortification was on the line. Just about a year earlier, in April of 1773, an accidental fire had largely destroyed the newer, better, larger fortification just to our north at Crown Point. This forced the hand of the government to make a decision about how to garrison the Champlain Valley. With colonial tensions rising in America, it was vital to have a fortification here on the line of communication between New York to the south and the province of Quebec to the north. They just needed to know which was it going to be, rebuilding Crown Point or investing in the fortification here at Ticonderoga. To that end, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, the Earl of Dartmouth, ordered Army High Command in North America to have a formal assessment done of the positions here in the Champlain Valley to determine which fortification, Crown Point or Ticonderoga, should be rebuilt given what was happening in North America and where the British government would ultimately allocate their money. Accordingly, on May 2nd, 1774, Captain Lieutenant John Montresor, a British engineer who had been serving in North America since the French and Indian War, was dispatched to come here to Ticonderoga and Crown Point and conduct a formal assessment. At Ticonderoga, Montresor was met by Captain William Delaplace, the 26th Regiment of Foot, the garrison's commander. What Montresor found at Ticonderoga was not pleasing. He described the walls in many cases, particularly the counterscarps and the outerworks, as leaning towards the horizon, while on the main walls of the fortifications he described capital breaches, that is, enormous gaps in the walls, not the result of warfare, but simply of time and of the lack of deferred maintenance by the small garrison here in the past decade and a half. Montresor's suggestion, and he agreed with Captain Delaplace and Frederick Haldimand, was that Crown Point was the better location for a fortification here in the Champlain Valley. He suggested that leveling the site of Ticonderoga and rebuilding it new would be less costly than trying to repair the old fortifications that were here. They faulted Ticonderoga's position, situated far enough back from the lake that it couldn't adequately protect naval assets on the water, and had a reputation as being a fairly unhealthy post. Montresor suggested creating a much smaller barracks and small fortifications on the site of a pre-existing redoubt at Crown Point, rather than rebuilding the entire fortification, and in preparing this report, compiled his estimates of the cost for that new structure, which were then dispatched to Army High Command in New York. Montresor prepared his report on May 13th, but it would take months for the government ultimately to come to its final decision about the posts at Ticonderoga and Crown Point. Despite the recommendations of Delaplace, Montresor, and Haldimand, General Thomas Gage consistently seemed to prefer the fortifications here at Ticonderoga as better controlling access between not just Lake Champlain, but also Lake George. However, Haldimand was only acting commander-in-chief. General Thomas Gage was on his way back to North America in the spring of 1774, and amongst other reports, would receive the information about Ticonderoga and Crown Point that Montresor had prepared. From there, after Gage's assessment, it would be sent back to Great Britain, where the Secretary of State for the Colonies would review the information and ultimately come to their decision. Government ultimately decided to restore not just Crown Point, but also Ticonderoga to a state of defense, the information only coming to America in November of 1774, too late in the year for any restoration work to begin. And all of the participants could not have imagined that in the spring of 1775, when restoration work was set to begin, the American Revolution would break out, forever sealing the fate of Ticonderoga in American history.